Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, September 6th, 2022. The new British Prime Minister Liz Truss says she'll focus on three priorities in the near term: tax cuts, energy prices, and the National Health Service. She became the new Prime Minister today after winning an election of British Conservative Party members. The outgoing Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, also from the Conservative Party, resigning today with a casual, "Well, this is it, folks," before listing what he sees as the accomplishments of his 3+ years as leader, and hinting he may return. The International Atomic Energy Agency says it remains gravely concerned about the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine and says there is an urgent need for measures to prevent a nuclear accident, including a safety and protection zone around the Russian military-occupied site. A UN Security Council meeting today discussed the IAEA's report. President Joe Biden holding a cabinet meeting to tout what he sees as recent legislative successes, including the healthcare, energy, and climate bill and the one dealing with boosting domestic computer chip production, as the U.S. Senate returns from its August recess, with the regular government spending bill high on the agenda to prevent a government shutdown at the end of the month. The U.S. House returns from the recess next week. And the White House COVID-19 response team with an update on the rollout of the variant-specific booster shots. And we start in Great Britain. This reporting from Reuters, comparing himself to a booster rocket that had fulfilled its mission. Boris Johnson said farewell to his Downing Street residence and office on Tuesday and described his future plans as a return to a quieter life. In what was a typically bombastic speech, Britain's outgoing Prime Minister pointedly took aim at those lawmakers in his Conservative Party he blames for forcing his resignation, and almost to prove them wrong, went on to list what he sees as his successes during his time as Premier. That from Reuters. Here's some of that final speech Tuesday morning in London outside the Prime Minister's residence, 10 Downing Street.
This is it, folks. Thank you, everybody, for coming out so early this morning. In only a couple of hours, I will be in Balmoral to see Her Majesty the Queen. And the torch will finally be passed to a new Conservative leader. The baton will be handed over in what has unexpectedly turned out to be a relay race. They changed the rules halfway through, but never mind that now. And through that lacquered black door, a new Prime Minister will shortly go to meet a fantastic group of public servants. The people who got Brexit done, the people who delivered the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, and never forget, 70% of the entire population got a dose within 6 months, faster than any comparable country. That is government for you. That's this Conservative government. People who organised those prompt early supplies of weapons to the heroic Ukrainian armed forces, an action that may very well have helped change the course of the biggest European war for 80 years. And because of the speed and urgency of what you did, everybody involved in this government, to get this economy moving again from July last year, in spite of all the opposition, all the naysayers, we have and will continue to have that economic strength to give people the cash they need to get through this energy crisis that has been caused by Putin's vicious war. And I know that Liz Truss and this compassionate Conservative government will do everything we can to get people through this crisis, and this country will endure it, and we will win. And if Putin thinks that he can succeed by blackmailing or bullying the British people, then he is utterly deluded.
The now former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson in London Tuesday morning. We'll hear from the new Prime Minister Liz Truss in just a moment. But as mentioned earlier, Boris Johnson also said in his farewell speech that he was like a booster rocket, and this from more from the Reuters article. He also offered a tantalizing reference for classic scholars when he compared himself to Cincinnatus, a Roman dictator who, despite his old age, left his small farm to take control of the Roman state to fight an invasion in 16 days. Cincinnatus returned to his farm, but legend has it he was recalled a second time to fend off another crisis, prompting some to wonder whether Johnson, 58 years old, would try to stage a comeback. More from Boris Johnson's speech.
as I leave office, unemployment down to lows not seen since I was about 10 years old and bouncing around on a space hopper, my friends. And on the subject of bouncing around in future careers, let me say that I am now like one of those booster rockets that has fulfilled its function, and I will now be gently re-entering the atmosphere and splashing down invisibly in some remote and obscure corner of the Pacific. And like Cincinnatus, I am returning to my plough, and I will be offering this government nothing but the most fervent support.
Boris Johnson in London this morning. As he said, he then flew to meet Queen Elizabeth at Balmoral Castle in Scotland to offer his resignation. And later, the incoming Prime Minister Liz Truss, who won that election among British Conservative Party members, also flew to Balmoral. This is the first time that Queen Elizabeth II has done this in Scotland in her 70 years on the throne, a transition from one prime minister to another. It's usually done at Buckingham Palace in London, not far from the prime minister's residence. But the Queen is 96 years old and has what the palace calls mobility issues. Well, after Liz Truss met the Queen, she flew back to London, and she spoke for a few minutes outside 10 Downing Street as the new Prime Minister of Great Britain. Here's the full speech, 4 minutes.
Good afternoon. I have just accepted Her Majesty the Queen's kind invitation to form a new government. Let me pay tribute to my predecessor. Boris Johnson delivered Brexit, the COVID vaccine, and stood up to Russian aggression. History will see him as a hugely consequential Prime Minister. I'm honoured to take on this responsibility at a vital time for our country. What makes the United Kingdom great is our fundamental belief in freedom, in enterprise, and in fair play. Our people have shown grit, courage, and determination time and time again. We now face severe global headwinds caused by Russia's appalling war in Ukraine and the aftermath of COVID. Now is the time to tackle the issues that are holding Britain back. We need to build roads, homes, and broadband faster. We need more investment and great jobs in every town and city across our country. We need to reduce the burden on families and help people get on in life. I know that we have what it takes to tackle those challenges. Of course, it won't be easy, but we can do it. We will transform Britain into an aspiration nation with high-paying jobs, safe streets, and where everyone, everywhere, has the opportunities they deserve. I will take action this day and action every day to make it happen. United with our allies, we will stand up for freedom and democracy around the world, recognising that we can't have security at home without having security abroad. As Prime Minister, I will pursue 3 early priorities. Firstly, I will get Britain working again. I have a bold plan to grow the economy through tax cuts and reform. I will cut taxes to reward hard work and boost business-led growth and investment. I will drive reform in my mission to get the United Kingdom working, building and growing. We'll get spades in the ground to make sure people are not facing unaffordable energy bills, and we will also make sure that we are building hospitals, schools, roads and broadband. Secondly, I will deal hands-on with the energy crisis caused by Putin's war. I will take action this week to deal with energy bills and to secure our future energy supply. Thirdly, I will make sure that people can get doctor's appointments and the NHS services they need. We will put our health service on a firm footing. By delivering on the economy, on energy and on the NHS, we will put our nation on the path to long-term success. We shouldn't be daunted by the challenges we face. As strong as the storm may be, I know that the British people are stronger. Our country was built by people who get things done. We have huge reserves of talent, of energy and determination. I am confident that together we can ride out the storm, we can rebuild our economy, and we can become the modern, brilliant Britain that I know we can be. This is our vital mission to ensure opportunity and prosperity for all people and future generations. I am determined to deliver. Thank you.
The new British Prime Minister Liz Truss outside the Prime Minister's residence in London today, her first day on the job. She is 47 years old. She's been a member of the Parliament since 2010 and has served in various cabinet offices under three previous Prime Ministers, Boris Johnson, Theresa May, and David Cameron. President Joe Biden tweeting, "Congratulations to Prime Minister Liz Truss. I look forward to deepening the special relationship between our countries and working in close cooperation on global challenges, including continued support for Ukraine as it defends itself against Russian aggression." On the subject of the war in Ukraine, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the United Nations watchdog, warns there is an urgent need to establish a security protection zone at the Zaporizhzhia power plant in Ukraine to prevent a nuclear catastrophe. The plant has been occupied by the Russian military for about 6 months since the start of the war. In a new report, the IAEA writes that the situation in Ukraine is unprecedented. It is the first time a military conflict has occurred amid the facilities of a large established nuclear power plant. NBC News writes the dire warning from the Vienna-based organization that is not given to hyperbole came just 24 hours after the Ukrainian energy company that runs the complex reported that the last line connecting the power plant to the Ukrainian electrical grid was disconnected after days of intensive shelling. The IAEA Director General Rafael Mariano Grossi updating the United Nations Security Council today about the team's recent inspection and the report issued today. Also briefing the Security Council, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
I remain gravely concerned about the situation in and around the Zaporizhzhia plant, including reports of recent shelling. Let's tell it like it is. Any damage, whether intentional or not, to Europe's largest nuclear power plant in Zaporizhzhia or to any other nuclear facility in Ukraine could spell catastrophe, not only for the immediate vicinity, but for the region and beyond. All steps must be taken to avoid such a scenario. Common sense and cooperation must guide the way forward. Any action that might endanger the physical integrity, safety, or security of the nuclear plant is unacceptable. All efforts to re-establish the plant as purely civilian infrastructure are vital. As a first step, Russian and Ukrainian forces must commit not to engage in any military activity towards the plant site or from the plant site. Zaporizhzhia facility and its surroundings must not be a target or a platform for military operations. As a second step, an agreement on a demilitarized perimeter should be secured. Specifically, that would include a commitment by Russian forces to withdraw all military personnel and equipment from that perimeter, and the commitment by Ukrainian forces not to move into it. Operators at the plant must be able to carry out their responsibilities and communications must be maintained. Now is the time to urgently agree on concrete measures to ensure the safety of the area.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres speaking today at the UN Security Council meeting in New York City. Two of the 14-member IAEA Zaporizhzhia inspection team have stayed behind there at the plant. While the U.S. and other Western countries and the Secretary General there accusing Russia of intentionally stationing military troops, vehicles, and weapons at the power plant as a shield and then launching attacks on Ukrainian targets from there, Russia accuses Ukraine of deliberately attacking the nuclear power plant and causing the risk of a radiation release. Speaking today at the Security Council meeting, the Russian ambassador to the UN, Vasily Nebenzia.
We're happy that the visit enabled you, Director General, and your team to personally assess the situation at the Zaporozhye NPP and see that the 7 pillars of security that you have formulated, the 7 principles that you have formulated are being strictly adhered to by us. It is important that we heard that in the course of your briefing on the 2nd of September. It's important that you, with your own eyes, could see that thanks to a cooperation between the staff, NPP, and the Russian armed forces who are protecting the station, it's functioning normally and there are no internal threats to its security. You had a very excellent opportunity to see that the only threat are created by the shellings and sabotage from the Ukrainian armed forces. And we see a confirmation of that in your conclusion made at the briefing when you said the agency is most concerned by the physical security of the station and its integrity, and the risks for that have increased because of its shelling in August. We regret that in your report on the safeguards implementation in Ukraine since April to September of this year, which appeared literally a couple of hours ago, this source of shelling is not directly named. We do understand your position as the head of an international regulator, but in the current situation, it's very important to call things by their name.
Vasily Nebenzia is Russia's ambassador to the United Nations, speaking at today's Security Council meeting after the briefing by the Director General of the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, after their team's visit to the Zaporizhzhia power plant, nuclear power plant in Ukraine. Speaking today representing the United States at the Security Council meeting, Jeffrey De Laurentiis. He is acting U.S. Ambassador for Special Political Affairs.
Colleagues, this is a matter of international nuclear safety and security. The potential danger here is enormous. It concerns us all. And so once again, we support Ukraine's call for the demilitarization of the area surrounding the Zaporizhzhia facility, and we demand Russia's immediate withdrawal from Ukraine's sovereign territory. Despite Russia's song and dance here today to avoid acknowledging responsibility for its actions, Russia has no right to expose the world to unnecessary risk and the possibility of a nuclear catastrophe. Worse, this is a situation entirely of Russia's making. The current danger at Zaporizhzhia is a result of Russia's unprovoked and unlawful invasion of Ukraine. And specifically, it is a result of Russia's premeditated March 4th seizure of this plant. The international community called for Russia to avoid the nuclear plant. Instead, Russian troops struck and seized the facility, jeopardizing the IAEA's 7 pillars of nuclear safety and security. Russia continues to conduct military operations around the plant. Every day Russia controls the plant increases the risk of a nuclear incident. Over the weekend, shelling once again led to the disconnection of an external power line, putting at risk the plant's operations. While we understand that the plant is currently generating enough power to operate its cooling systems, Russia's continued military presence in the area will continue to put the plant and the entire region in serious danger.
Jeffrey De Laurentiis is acting U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations for Special Political Affairs at today's latest in a long line of meetings by the UN Security Council on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. From the New York Times, Russia is buying millions of artillery shells and rockets from North Korea, according to newly declassified American intelligence, a sign that global sanctions have severely restricted its supply chains and forced Moscow to turn to pariah states for military supplies. Disclosure comes days after Russia received initial shipments of Iranian-made drones, some of which American officials said had mechanical problems. That was the New York Times reporting. This came up at today's Pentagon briefing with the press secretary, Air Force Brigadier General Pat Ryder.
A question on the latest intelligence suggesting that Russia is hoping to buy some millions of dollars of rockets and artillery from North Korea. Has the Pentagon seen any indication that that is ongoing already or preparation for that? And then just a quick one on the Secretary's trip this week. Do you expect that there will be more aid announced or any other changes in U.S. troop posture in Europe as part of this coming meeting?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Lita. So let me take your second question first and say that I don't have any announcements to make right now. Certainly, the Secretary looks forward to the conversations as part of the Ukraine contact group, and we'll be sure to keep you updated on that front in terms of any outcomes. As far as your first question, yes, we do have indications that Russia has approached North Korea to request ammunition. I'm not able to provide any more detail than that at this point in time, but it does demonstrate and is indicative of the situation that Russia finds itself in terms of its logistics and sustainment capabilities as it relates to Ukraine. Certainly, as has been said, we assess that things are not going well on that front for Russia. So the fact that they're reaching out to North Korea is a sign that that they're having some challenges on the sustainment front.
The Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder, who is also an Air Force Brigadier General, at today's Pentagon briefing with reporters. A Voice of America article adding this: North Korea's arms export to Russia would be a violation of UN resolutions that ban the country from exporting to or importing weapons from other countries. The article goes on, North Korea has sought to tighten relations with Russia as much of Europe and the West has pulled away, blaming the United States for the Ukraine crisis and decrying the West's hegemonic policy as justifying military action by Russia in Ukraine to protect itself. And this also from the article, the North Koreans have hinted interest in sending construction workers to help rebuild Russian-occupied territories in Ukraine's east. Washington Today continues in a moment.
There are a lot of places to get political information, but only at C-SPAN do you get it straight from the source. No matter where you are from or where you stand on the issues, C-SPAN is America's network. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. If it happens here, or here, or here, or anywhere that matters, America is watching on C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. President Joe Biden, writes CNN, will urge his cabinet secretaries on Tuesday to swiftly implement key legislation, seizing another opportunity to tout his administration's legislative successes just 2 months before the midterm elections. The president speaking today about the infrastructure spending bill, the health care, energy, and climate change bill that the Democrats call the Inflation Reduction Act, also the CHIPS and Science Act that concerns computer chip manufacturing and science research. President holding the cabinet meeting at the White House.
Well, it's good for all of us to be together. We're meeting today at an incredibly important time in the country, to state the obvious. And over the past 10 months, we've won passage of some, I think, extraordinary parts of our economic agenda. The bipartisan infrastructure law, the biggest infrastructure package since the Eisenhower administration, with the help of some of our friends on the other side of the aisle. The CHIPS Act, a law to spur investments in microchips, which I might point out were invented here in the United States of America and refined. But the CHIPS Act is a gigantic investment, and it's going to create a number of jobs and technologies for the future. The Inflation Reduction Act, the law brings down the cost of prescription drugs, health premiums, healthcare premiums, and invests in made in America and a clean energy future. And the three things, along with other steps we've taken, like the American Rescue Plan, student debt relief, and is proof that democracy can deliver for the people. And there's a foundation of the kind of strong, forward-looking economy that we want to continue to build. The economy with lower prices, more breathing room for middle-class families, an economy with good-paying jobs you can raise a family on and just have, as I said, just a little bit of breathing room, whether you went to college or not. An economy that leads the world in technology and clean energy, and an economy that ends our dependence on foreign sources across the entire supply chain. And so this economy that works for the country from the bottom up and the middle out, as I said from the beginning. I'm not a big fan of trickle-down economics. I find is the trickle stops fairly quickly coming down. But when working folks are doing well, the middle class is doing well, the wealthy do very well. Everybody does well. And so today, I've assembled the cabinet to lay out in detail how we're going to implement each of these laws that we worked so hard to get passed, and we've gotten passed. And because passing these historic bills is only the first step in delivering to the American people, but it's just that, it's the first step. I've asked each relevant cabinet agency to come forward today with a plan to help get the American people and our economy on the right side as fast as possible, and to spend taxpayers' money wisely. I might add, with all these legislations we passed, Madam Vice President, we've still reduced the deficit substantially. In our first year, over $300 billion, and this year, it's estimated to be somewhere in excess of $1.5 trillion, maybe as much as $1.7 trillion. So, we're going to spend the money wisely.
President Joe Biden opening up a cabinet meeting at the White House. His Vice President Kamala Harris also there. It's his first cabinet meeting since March. One of the cabinet members attending, the Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, announcing today a more specific plan to deal with the $50 billion in funding in the CHIPS Act the president signed into law this summer. It increases domestic computer chip production. That's the goal. The plan includes $28 billion, according to the department, for leading-edge logic and memory chips through grants, subsidized loans, and loan guarantees, $10 billion to increase production of current-generation semiconductors and chips, $11 billion for research and development to create what the department calls a dynamic new network of innovation. Well, Commerce Secretary Raimondo stopping by the White House briefing room, reporters asking about when the American people can expect results and if the department is prepared to back up the promises that the money will be spent wisely.
Bottom line for us, how quickly is an American going to get hired with this money, and how quickly before somebody is buying a phone with one of these American-made chips in it?
Yeah. So, great question.
And then I have a follow-up to that.
You've already seen chip companies making big announcements. Micron is announcing a huge new facility. I was just in New Hampshire. onsemi is breaking ground on a new facility. Intel announced a new facility. These investments have been made by these companies because the CHIPS Act passed, and they have confidence now that the money will be put out the door. So I can't answer you, how quickly exactly a specific chip is going to come, but the point is you're already seeing it. Global Wafers made an announcement, $5 billion investment in Texas. So I'd say immediately, the effects are immediately being felt. In terms of our process, February, like you said, we'll begin the process. I think you can start, I'm going to hope to start putting money out the door, next spring to specific companies. Here's the thing, there's going to be a range of projects. There'll be smaller, simpler projects, maybe for expansion of existing facilities. And then there'll be very large, complex, leading-edge projects. I think you could see in the spring of next year some of the smaller money going out the door.
And you listed a very stringent list of criteria. Can't be invested in stock buybacks. Can't be for chips that get made or sold in China unless they're for the Chinese market. A bunch of other things. Do you know that companies exist right now that are willing to meet those stringent demands? Did you check that before you published it?
Yes.
So they're ready to go
Yes.
with what's there?
Yes.
And do you at the Commerce Department then have the money necessary to hire those top-notch negotiators and specialists?
Yes.
Or do you need more from Congress? Because often what
Yes.
ends up happening, we get a big government announcement, multi-billion dollars. Here it comes from the federal government. And 3 years later, we're writing stories, telling stories about how that money was mismanaged, and the department that was overseeing it didn't have enough. You're saying you do?
Yes, I do. What we're doing right now is we're in the process of hiring about 50 people. We do have the money. They will be expert. And I have absolute confidence we will be able to do this. Also, the answer to your first question is, again, Micron wouldn't be announcing a massive expansion in Idaho if chips weren't passed. So, yes, they know the strings are attached, and yes, they will operate under those strings.
Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo in the White House briefing room. Wall Street today, the Dow down 173, NASDAQ down 85, S&P down 16. U.S. Senate back in session following the month-long August recess, also known as the district work period. House still out for one more week. C-SPAN spoke with The Hill's editor-in-chief, Bob Cusack, about what the very slim Senate Democratic majority would like to accomplish in the final weeks of the session, and also about some must-pass legislation, federal government spending to prevent a government shutdown at the start of the new fiscal year.
Well, with the election season ahead, it's always this time of year for Congress is the things they have to get done and the things they want to get done. What kind of pressure does the midterm election put on the Democratic leaders, particularly in the House, to get done, and with Chuck Schumer, obviously in the Senate, to get done before the midterm elections?
I think, Bill, some of the pressure was relieved when they passed the Inflation Reduction Act, and of course the message wars have begun on that bill, which was supported by Democrats and, of course, opposed by all Republicans. Anyway, I do think that they have a lot of other things they want to get done. They want to protect gay marriage in the wake of the Supreme Court decision on abortion. So that's something that the question is, can they get to 60? Will enough Republicans support that legislation? It remains to be seen. I think if they had the votes, they would be voting on it. But they do want to vote on that. There's a legislation that would change after the January 6th riot how the electoral count is done to clarify that the vice president cannot overturn a presidential election. That has the support of some Democrats and Republicans. But Bill, it all comes down to Senate floor time. The House can move multiple bills in a week. The Senate really can only do one or two things at most, and they're focusing on nominations, both in committee and on the floor. They take time. And why are they focusing on nominations? Well, they want to give President Biden his team, but also they know nominations could be a lot more difficult if Mitch McConnell is the majority leader. So they want to get as many nominations done before the election as they can. And that's why they do have on the schedule that the Senate could be back for 2 weeks in October. Charles Schumer, the majority leader, could change his mind on that, because usually in October, all members are home campaigning. But in the Senate, not every senator's up. So they could come back to do some unfinished work. But you're right. The most important thing is must pass legislation. And that means funding the government by October 1. And then the question is, what is in that bill other than funding the government? That's the big question.
What kind of potential landmines, if you will, or holdups or things that could be attached to that spending bill that could really grind that to a halt?
I think the first one is permitting reform. This is a bill that was looked to be promised to Joe Manchin in supporting the Inflation Reduction Act. This legislation is not supported by environmentalists, and certainly Raul Grijalva, who's a key committee chair on the environment in the House, has said he wants to block that bill. And he said, listen, the Inflation Reduction Act is in law. This permitting bill, which he opposes, is not in law. And that could be a real problem, because progressives could band together and potentially vote it down. So it's a problem for leadership. Do I think there'll be a shutdown? No, I don't think it's in anyone's interest on either side of the aisle to have a shutdown, but there's going to be drama until they get that bill passed.
Bob Cusack is editor-in-chief of the media company The Hill, joining C-SPAN on Tuesday morning's Washington Journal program. As the Senate met today for the first time back from recess, the Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, welcomed everyone back, and he too spoke of some of what he views as Democratic accomplishments this year.
Mr. President, and I'd like to welcome you and all of my colleagues back from the August work period. I hope everyone had the chance to travel across their states, meet with their constituents, listen to their concerns, and share all the major accomplishments the Senate secured over the last few months. Indeed, the Senate gavels back into session after a season of immense productivity. When Democrats assumed the majority in 2021, I promised we would leave no stone unturned in tackling the biggest challenges facing our country. 20 months later, Democrats have delivered on our promises. We promised to lower costs for the American people in the wake of crippling inflation. So we passed the Inflation Reduction Act to reduce energy costs, reduce health care costs, expand tax breaks for working and middle Americans. We also promised to take on big pharma and lower prescription drug costs. So we passed historic legislation to lower insulin costs for seniors on Medicare, cap out-of-pocket expenses, and empowered Medicare to finally be able to negotiate drug prices. This for the first time ever, long sought after by many Congresses, accomplished by this one. We promised to take on entrenched oil interests and get tough on climate change. And so we passed the largest clean energy package ever, by a long margin, by the way. Thanks to our work, Americans will see their energy bills go down, their savings go up, all while we created millions of new, good-paying jobs and finally dealt with climate change in a very significant and real way.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer today on the Senate floor. He went on to discuss some of those other bills that were also mentioned by President Biden, signed into law this year, the one dealing with computer chip manufacturing. And then Senator Schumer looked ahead to that government funding bill.
As we begin this short work period, we have several high-priority items that demand our immediate attention. Before this work period concludes, the Senate must come together to pass a continuing resolution to extend government funding beyond the September 30th deadline. Last week, the administration sent us a request for a number of funding items they'd like us to work on, from aid to Ukraine, pandemic relief, and other items. This process, of course, needs to be bipartisan. Democrats are going to work in good faith to avoid even a hint of a shutdown, and it is my expectation that our Republican colleagues will do the same. We'll also work this month to confirm even more of President Biden's judicial nominees.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor today. The Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, also speaking, opening up his first speech since the recess about the devastating flooding in the eastern part of Kentucky and the need for more relief for the people affected. The Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, then went on to talk about some national matters.
American families are hurting, and they're very clearly telling anybody who will listen to them what our priorities ought to be. Americans' number one concern, by a mile, is the crushing inflation that Democrats spent us into. The share of Americans who name inflation as our most urgent problem is almost triple the next closest issue. Democrats' policies have working people paying a Democrat inflation tax of more than 13% on top of their grocery bills, 15% extra on their electric bills, and on, down the list of everything that families need to just stay afloat. As a result, Democrats have presided over plummeting real wages for American workers. The average American worker has gotten a raise on paper, but their bigger paycheck buys them less than their smaller paycheck bought them this time last year. Now, this wasn't inevitable. Inflation did not have to be nearly this bad. Democrats chose to spend so recklessly. Democrats chose to wage this economic warfare against the middle class, against their savings, against their financial stability, against the purchasing power and the lifestyles that workers and parents sacrifice literally for years to build up. Americans are also deeply concerned about the erosion of law and order in our streets, in our cities, on our borders, and across our country. When you combine together crime and immigration, the issue of law and order ranks as the people's clear number 2 concern, second only to inflation. Last year, the national murder rate reached its highest level in 25 years. Cities across the country are contending with an historic surge in carjackings. My hometown of Louisville is now averaging an auto theft every 2.5 hours. President Biden's failed border policies have Customs and Border Protection encountering 200% more fentanyl and apprehending the most illegal immigrants they've seen in more than 20 years. So there's no mystery about the crisis facing our country. The American people know what needs to be addressed. Republicans know what needs to be addressed. But unfortunately, the Democrats who control the Senate, the House, and the White House are still refusing to get with the program. Democrats' top priority for the entire year was the multi-hundred-billion-dollar reckless taxing and spending spree they rammed through in August. Americans may want their leaders to cut inflation, fight crime and drugs, and secure the border, but Democrats just spent hundreds of billions of dollars of the people's money doing precisely none of that. Instead, our big spending colleagues treated themselves to 87,000 new IRS agents, job-killing tax hikes, and the same kind of liberal energy policies that now have California officials warning about rolling blackouts and begging people not to charge up their electric cars. And our Democratic colleagues have given no indication that cutting inflation, fighting crime, or securing the border will be on the Senate's agenda for September either. When our people are hurting this badly and speaking this clearly, it takes a willful choice, for Democrats to ignore them. Stable prices, safe streets, reliable energy, and a secure border. 4 of the most basic duties that any government owes its people. 4 things Democrats have proven they cannot deliver.
The Senate Republican leader, the Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, on the Senate floor today. The White House COVID-19 response team holding a briefing today promoting the newly authorized booster shots of the vaccine tailored to the 2 prominent coronavirus variants currently in circulation in the U.S., BA4 and BA5 of Omicron. But they're also warned that if new COVID-19 response funding is not approved by Congress, there may not be enough new boosters to go around if a new surge emerges. Dr. Ashish Jha is the White House COVID-19 response coordinator. He said as these new booster shots are rolled out, this week is a game changer in the fight against the pandemic.
Barring any new variant curveballs, we've seen curveballs, but barring those variant curveballs, for a large majority of Americans, we are moving to a point where a single annual COVID shot should provide a high degree of protection against serious illness all year. That's an important milestone. Now, let me be clear. For our highest risk individuals, and here I'm thinking about my elderly parents, for instance, who are in their 80s, or one of my close friends who recently had a liver transplantation. Individuals like that may need more than annual protection. And we will ensure in this administration that they get whatever protection they need. Now, I know over the past 18 months, figuring out what you need and when you need it hasn't always been super simple. That all changes. These new vaccines make it easy for us to think differently. So here's the simple version. If you're 12 and above and previously vaccinated, it's time to go get an updated COVID-19 shot. Now, here are a couple of caveats because there are always a few caveats. If you got a recent infection or were recently vaccinated, it's reasonable to wait a few months. Now, we expect millions of people to get the shot this month as folks get back to school, get back to work, and get back into their regular routines after the summer. And as the annual flu vaccination campaign kicks into high gear later this month and into early October, we expect millions will choose to get their COVID-19 shot at the same time, or over the course of the fall when people go in for routine checkups. The good news is you can get both your flu shot and COVID shot at the same time. It's actually a good idea. I really believe this is why God gave us 2 arms, one for the flu shot and the other one for the COVID shot. But our goal for this fall is we will make sure, we the administration will make sure that vaccines are free, that they're widely available, and they are easy to access for everybody. But we're also focused on taking targeted actions to reach those at the highest risk, to ensure we're meeting those individuals where they are. We will put special efforts to reach older Americans, those living in congregate care settings like nursing homes, and others who are particularly vulnerable.
Dr. Ashish Jha is the White House COVID-19 response coordinator at today's virtual White House COVID-19 response briefing. Joining him, the Health and Human Services Secretary Javier Becerra, who said by the end of the week, over 90% of Americans will live within 5 miles of the new updated vaccines, and you can search for where to get them at vaccines.gov. Also there, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Director. She said the 7-day average daily deaths from COVID-19, she said, still too high, about 375 per day in the U.S., well above the 200 deaths a day we saw earlier this spring. She said, in my mind, it's far too high for a vaccine-preventable disease. Also in health news today, electronic cigarette maker Juul Labs agreeing to pay almost $440 million to settle a 2-year investigation by 33 states into the marketing of its high-nicotine vaping products to teenagers. Associated Press writes the settlement resolves one of the biggest legal threats facing the beleaguered company, which still faces 9 separate lawsuits from other states. Additionally, Juul faces hundreds of personal suits brought on behalf of teenagers and others who say they became addicted to the company's vaping products. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Get more of Washington's top stories sent to you every day by subscribing to C-SPAN's evening newsletter Word for Word. You can sign up at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.